Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the 7 Hz Crinacle collaboration known as 02. So here we have 02 on the left, and we will quickly touch on the 01 Mecha Edition on the right, and we'll kind of talk about the differences right here. So I think right off the bat, 02 went with the transparent shells. I think all the colors have transparent shells. All of the shells on 01 were opaque, even the red one that you can see down there. So what is also kind of carried over from 01, 01 also had a sponge under the grill as well. You just couldn't see it. I think that part is pretty much the same. The dynamic driver is different, and basically they said it is better. So I don't know, I would call it different and better is sort of how they call it on the front. This one is called 02, and this one I think is actually called 02 as well. So the cable actually is a little bit different too. I think Crinacle described it as softer and less prone to breakage or tangling, or maybe both. But yeah, this one is more of a smooth, softer style compared to the 01, which actually had a kind of a different coating on it and a different feel to it, a little bit stiffer. So yeah, they did actually change the cable just a little bit. If you just look at it, you know, if you look at it quickly, it kind of looks like they're the same, but definitely not the same cable. So this was the Mecha Edition. Not too many people got to see this one up close and personal, but red shells, black faceplate, Mecha on there. So yeah, a very nice set, a very nice version of 01. I thought I would show it off because I didn't actually put it on video. I bought it and then never actually showed it, but I do have the red Mecha Edition. So I think that's covers what is going on the outside of those. I think inside the box, the package of tips I think is actually the same as 01. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but they look very similar. So let's kind of begin at what is going on with 02. And this one really started off as this: ask and you shall receive. You know, 02 is essentially almost a retune based on the feedback from 01. And namely, I'll call it the part improvement, right? So the shells and the cable, it's kind of a slight improvement, new driver, it's kind of an improvement. But the other part of it is a retuning based on feedback from the original, which was this guy. Namely, give it more bass and less fatigue. And you can kind of see exactly how 02 plays out on the graph, and it is almost exactly as you would imagine. So 02 in the red, 0 stock in the blue. So you can kind of see 02 actually did indeed increase the bass. And the thing to notice is where it starts to increase. You know, that's probably 400-ish, maybe it's 350-ish, but it's far enough back where it actually increased both mid bass and sub bass, and I think that was an important distinction. When I talked about 0 originally, I think just putting something on the vent would only change the sub bass, if I remember. It would tilt it up a little bit, and that was kind of a okay version of giving it a little more bass, but not nearly as nice as this newer bass curve. And then make it less fatiguing, so you can kind of see the original 0 in the blue, kind of right there at the Harmon line, and 02 brings it down quite a bit into more relaxed, more comfortable levels for, you know, a more general appealing upper mid, lower treble. That's exactly what they did there, and again, they handled that very well. Nice looking curve. And then the other thing to notice is somewhere right around this guy. So somewhere right around the 10K, they brought that value down. And that was sort of one of those comments that I wasn't aware of, where people were saying that was a spicier thing. And Crinacle mentioned it in his video, so I would point it out. But that probably, I think that airiness that you got out of 10K was actually not a bad thing. But it is adjusted for 02 in the red. You can kind of see it's the lower values. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. So that covers that little bit. But then I would also say be careful what you wish for, as you may just get it. And I think that's essentially what happened with this one. I think the feedback of the original was relative to other sets which were popular at the time. So 02 ends up very close to a set that you may already have. And if you don't know which version to get, you get version 2, because that's the one that's going to be the general appealing one. So let's look at what it looks like compared to some other sets. And kind of just as I was saying is, they adjusted the levels based on feedback, but that feedback was sort of based on sets that were popular at the time and sets that came after. So you end up with a lot of bass boosted looking Harman sets. So Kiwi Ear's Cadenza, Polaris is a newer one, Warner was one kind of back at the time, which actually dropped the sub bass a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And Sonos 02. So all of these are kind of clustered together, and then you get some different flavors of upper mids, lower treble, and then you're going to get different versions of upper treble as well. But, you know, very much close flavors of something that you already have or have heard before or was very popular at the time. So, yeah, I think that was the downside of making these changes, is it ended up going from 01, which was kind of a groundbreaking original set at the time, to something that now sounds very, very close to other sets, which were popular last year as well. So people complained, they responded, came out with a version based on feedback, and kind of that's where we are. So I will say that the sound takes on more of a V shape at the bass and the vocals. It really brings those two forward, as I said, and it's just kind of a great entry-level set tuning for that same reason. And this kind of goes back to this 10K area. So this was brought down just a little bit, so you end up with this kind of emphasis right around here, so this bass boost, and then you get this becomes a little bit more prominent because this was brought down a little bit, so you end up with a V shape kind of right between here, and it ends up bringing the vocals, they tend to pop a little bit more forward. And I think as an entry-level set, a set that maybe this is your first or third style set, and you really don't want to deal with recessed vocals, I think this type of tuning is actually going to work out very well. If you have lots and lots of sets, you'll consider that and say, that's something for me and my preferences or not. But yeah, it's sort of something noticeable compared to the other sets, the way this was brought down, and this becomes a little bit more forward, and then this becomes a little bit more forward as well. That was, I think, slightly different than something that I noticed. So that bass, definitely they patched the mid-bass hole, like I said. Do take note of where this starts to rise, and that was one of the weaker points of the original Zero, was it wasn't a whole lot of mid-bass. So they definitely patched that hole, put in some mid-bass, which was what was needed, but also raised the sub-bass level to, you know, that's a pretty big number out there. That's like a 10 dB sub-bass level there at 20 hertz. So that is definitely what was needed. Definitely needed some mid-bass to make it general appealing level, and it can make your pop music not only recognizable but engaging, and I think that's exactly what 02 does. The sub-bass kind of takes it from patching it to, you know, where the mid-bass level was just kind of patched because there was a little bit light. The sub-bass takes it, you know, something that's less recognizable as Zero, because there's just a lot of sub-bass there for that level, and they brought down the pin area, so it's more noticeable. I think they should have kept, I would have loved to see them kind of bump this out and then arc it right back down to exactly where 01 was. It didn't really need this sub bass, and it tends to make it less recognizable as Zero, where Zero was this nice clean set. This just adds a little bit of cloudiness to it that wasn't really, it's not really adding a whole lot to it. What really added a lot to it was the mid bass part to it. So if this had actually arced down, you would have ended up with a fuller body set, which was what 02 is, but then not have this added kind of fuzziness of the sub bass that's not really adding a whole lot to it. So that would have been my thing, but that is what it is. So you are getting a bit of both. So do remember that. So the mids. Definitely 02 takes the edge off of 01, and I think that was priority number one, was to get rid of that fatiguing bit right there in the pinna area. 02 absolutely does that. It gives a more natural body from that mid-bass bump and hits a very familiar sounding midsection. As I said, this one sounds quite a bit like other sets that are in the same price range. Frequency response, you know, all these guys kind of sound kind of similar, but definitely more so. What is most noticeable, as I said, with those vocals tend to be a little bit slightly more forward. I noticed it more on some sources than others, but it's definitely more noticeable if you play with the volume a little, you turn it up a little bit. I think the voices come a little bit more further forward, but it's really just kind of a nitpicky thing. It doesn't work as well at higher volume because of that. Everything becomes a little bit more forward, and as you turn it up, it becomes, you know, quite a bit forward. It tends to affect the stage. But again, as I said, it's just another reason why I would recommend this set over other sets, is because it is a little bit more forward. And that's, if you aren't used to IEMs, or this is your first or maybe your third, and you don't want to deal with that recessed vocal thing, this is kind of set up exactly for a very general appealing sound in that range. So for that reason, it's actually a very nice entry-level set. Treble, again, like I talked about, that kind of reworked that part. So reworked the lower part to make it less fatiguing. So this little bit less fatiguing, brought down the 10K, also less fatiguing. So reworked it to make that 10K less spicy according to Crinacle, but also less airy, which I agree. I think it comes across as less airy compared to the original. And I do think the reduction in the lower treble was right on, and the 10K maybe affected other parts, which we will talk about now. So stage, and I think this will be my most nitpicky part on 02. And, it's a $20 set, so I don't want to hammer it, but I think if you're very used to hearing some of the modern stages on even $20 sets, they tend to project quite well. A track like Radiohead's Everything in the Right Place is really not projected. It's really mostly in your head. And I do think that this little 10K bit brought down the height of the soundstage into something that's in your head. The width is kind of okay, but the forward vocals, again, all this stuff tends to work against a better soundstage or a more open soundstage. And I think 02, yeah, it is a little bit less airy, but it's also a little less, the size of the soundstage is actually quite a bit different, and it's kind of more of an in-your-head thing. And again, I think as for the target market, no one's actually going to notice this. People who are buying $20 sets are probably not going to notice it. If you have a lot of sets, you're probably going to notice it. But in 2023, if you're paying attention to soundstage and the size of it and the projection around your head, I think it actually will be quite noticeable. And I do think it kind of comes back to that upper treble change. So there you go. So that's what I got on 02. Again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.